Hey everyone, it's Cam here, welcoming you to another episode of The Build Room. In this week's episode, we have some brand new lowered suspension and wheel spacers, and we are stancing out the A90 Supra. So stick around and check it out. Okay, so today's episode is going to be a fun one. Because Violet Crumbles is still taking up the majority of room here in the garage, I am unfortunately going to be working out in the blazing hot sun in the driveway, which means I'll be giving you my best Floridian impression of Tavares, being the sweatiest man on the internet, and I'm sure I'm going to end up looking like $1 million by the end of it. And that project for today is going to be getting my new Eibach Pro kit and my Mode Plus spacer kit underneath the A90 Supra. So the spacers themselves are pretty self-explanatory. They're basically just a piece of billet aluminium that's machined up with fairly tight tolerances. These feel like they're really good quality. So I've never used anything from Mode Plus before. So this was a bit of a gamble, but now that I've received them, really happy with the quality of the final product and can't wait to get them on the car. And what these are gonna do is they basically just sit in between the hub and the wheel, the back of the wheel, to get it flush with the guard. The only other thing that we have to deal with is the fact that there is probably a 3-finger gap above both of the wheels at the moment, and that is just no good. Now the car's a daily driver, so I didn't want to drop it too much, which is why I chose the Eibach kit. Now, if you're gonna go for the Eibach kit, I'll just warn you straight out, in the Pro kit, there's 2 different versions. This one is the tamer version. It should give me a 20mm drop front and rear. Now the other Pro kit is more aggressive. It'll give you 1.7 inches at the front, which is about 44mm, and 1.2 at the rear, which is around 30mm, and 45mm would have had me scraping and bottoming out on pretty much everything. The other complexity with that more aggressive kit is you also have to replace the bump stops front and rear. Now that's easy on the front because we already have to take the boots and bump stops out when we're changing over the spring. But on the rear, you can actually avoid removing the rear strut because in the A90, the springs and the rear struts are divorced from each other. The strut doesn't sit inside the coil, so we can avoid the extra effort of having to remove the strut, swap out those bump stops and put it all together. The only thing we really need to be careful about is not to break the height sensor which sits on the rear swing arm. Otherwise you get a code popping up that says you have a chassis error, your headlights won't level, and there'll be all sorts of bad things going on. The rear springs also have noise isolators pre-installed, which are basically a plastic or rubber sheathing around the spring at certain areas where the spring would normally compress, and under heavy load you might hear the 2 pieces of metal touching each other. So on a car like this, having hoopty sounding noises is not really the look we're going for. So as I said before, we are doing this one out in the driveway in the full sun. So the first thing I'm gonna have to do is slip, slop, slap. Those of you that live in Australia or have visited here in our summer will know that the Australian sun is absolutely devastating. So instead of looking like a lobster at the end of this episode, I'm gonna spend the entire episode looking like a greased up pig.
Then grease me up, woman!
The second thing we're gonna have to do is get it up on jack stands and get the wheels off. So let's get out there and get it done. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is remove the springs while the struts remain in the car. It's not a particularly difficult job, but you do need to be careful when removing the springs, as there's a tremendous amount of kinetic energy stored in a compressed spring, and we're gonna be letting it out. We're basically gonna be undoing the top nut inside the strut top, so the struts can fold out past the guards and we can remove the springs. In order to do that, we need to remove a bunch of stuff that's gonna get caught up and stop that strut moving all the way out. First, we'll remove the sway bar link, which connects from the thick steel sway bar at the bottom to the back of the strut at the top. It's held in place by a 17mm nut, It's pretty easy to remove, and once you've done that, you can just push that link bar back out of the way, finish up by putting the nut back on the link so that you don't lose it. Then it's time to remove a few electrical connections and free up some cables. Okay, so this one has a pin at the base. You want to get right in down the bottom of the plug. You'll be able to push that pin in, slide her out. This one is much simpler. Simply press at the top, pull out. Yeah, we'll take this off. Leave that hanging free. This line has to come away here. That's just to give it as much room as possible. And it also connects down here, so we'll be taking this one out so that we have as much free cable as possible. So lift it up as much as possible. It'll snag on here because they're barbed, and then you really just need to wiggle one of these off. And then the other one will come with it. Again, just to get slack for when we drop this out of the way. Okay, so I'm showing you the left-hand strut here now because this is the side the height sensor's on. You can see here there's a sensor that has articulating arms on it that connect down to the lower link. We need to disconnect that link before dropping the struts down, or it'll either break the ball joints or the sensor itself. It can be a really fiddly job, but if you push the 4-pointed arrowhead together while levering from behind, you should have a bit of luck after a lot of swearing. The good news is that's the last thing we need to free up here. So now when this falls forwards, none of this should catch and stop it from moving out. Now we have to undo the top nut on the strut mount. So the first thing that we're going to need to do there are some covers. So there's a strut cover there, and if we could just get that one off, that would be fine. But instead we're going to have to remove this back cover as well, because it covers the fixing point for one of these. So this back one, it does have some sensor lines in it, but if you just twist this top notch to unlock, and then you can lift that panel away. Okay, so this one we're just pushing down and pulling it out. Okay, and then we slide out. There's actually, it doesn't look like it, but there's a clip in there, you can pull things out. And then we take out the washer bottle line as well. Couple of plugs there, and then we can slide that through as well, and we're out. Now we just need to get to this little guy here. If you have a trim removal tool like this one here, you just want to slide it underneath the pin and pull the pin out first. Easy as, like that. What that does is keeps the plastic in here tight. So now that that's out, just pop that out. Same goes on the other side. And then if you can't get it the rest of the way, once it's up that high, you can get some needle nose pliers under it, and out she comes. And this is a pressed in fit here, so there'll just be a little bit of resistance if you get your fingers under there, and it'll pop out like that. And then we can get to the top nut for the strut here. Now before we go and do that, we just have to get a jack under the strut and some spring compressors on that spring so that it doesn't fire off and potentially dent the car when we try to drop the strut down. Okay, we're just going underneath this bottom swing arm here. We're not looking to put a lot of pressure on this, we're just looking to support it so that when I undo the top nut on the strut, this can't push down and drop away at any speed. It's going to be held there by the weight of the car, and then I'll be able to back this off slowly. Now, even though I'm going to have a controlled movement here, I am still going to put spring compressors on the car just to be doubly sure, but also to give myself a little bit more room when I'm trying to take them out, because if I let them uncompress fully, they'll be very high and they'll be very hard to get past the guard. Okay, so just one on either side. Now I don't need access to that top nut. I'm literally doing these up by hand. And as we release the jack, it's then going to start applying force to these. So we just need them so they won't slide around. Nice and secure there. Okay, gonna go the other side of, just gonna hit that sensor unfortunately. So just gonna go the other side here. So they're both pretty tight, I'm comfortable with that. Okay, you can see in here, we have, this is the strut top housing here, and we could take these 4 bolts out and the whole strut could come out, but I don't want to do that. I'm leaving the top hat in, and what I'm going to do is undo this nut that is around the strut insert, and that will allow the shock absorber and the spring to fall away from this mount as we release that jack. So I'm going to undo this with a rattle gun. If you find that for some reason it starts spinning the shock, so this Allen key here will stop the strut spinning as you try to remove the bolt. The problem being is normally if you put a socket over this, you have no access to that. So you can do one of 2 things. If you happen to have a set of through drive sockets, and those are sockets that have a hole all the way through them, you'll be able to slip that over, pop your Allen wrench all the way down until it locks in place, and you'll be able to undo it that way. Now, if you don't have a set of those, you can take the more backyard route, which is to drop your 19mm socket over the top, then use a set of vice grips locked onto that, and you can still get your Allen wrench down and locked in place. Now, I'm not going to do it that way because I have the tools and I don't want to ruin my socket. This will, you know, scratch all the chrome off when you try and do it this way, but it is a way to get that off. All right, so we'll try and loosen it with the impact gun first. Oh, and we're good, it's come off. So now that that nut is gone, the only thing stopping the force of the spring pushing this strut down is the jack underneath it. So we're just going to slowly let that jack off. Got me. So we're just slowly going to let that jack down, and what we should find is the springs expand until the compressors limit them, and then we can pull the whole strut out with the spring on top. So we let the jack down slowly, be very careful. We don't want any sharp shocks to those spring compressors. All right, so we've got that away. Then just with a bit of pressure, we should be able to okay, know what that came off. So, bring the strut to vertical, as close to vertical as you can get, and it should just, see this has got a bit of movement in it anyway, but we can just tuck it under, like so. And then from there, we can take the whole spring off. Now be careful with this because we've still got a spring under pressure there. Just loosen these up bit by bit. Just a little bit on each side. And now we have a safe stock spring, which can go on the shelf because it's good to be able to revert to stock. All right, these are the new springs. They should go in with the logo right way up. So if you put this in, if you've got it upside down, this will be an extremely tight fit. And what it's got to do is just drop into that keeper there. You'll see there's a keeper all the way around for the spring. So just line up the bump stop with the top of the strut. Slide the spring back over, just be careful of that paint on the guard. And there is a similar cutout on the bottom piece. You've got to make sure you lock into that as well. Okay, if you look at the top of the strut here, you can see that the boot is higher than the strut top, which is going to cause problems when we try to move that assembly under the guard. So the best thing to do here is to break out the spring compressors again and lock that spring down so the boot is about 1 centimeter lower than the top of the strut thread. Now the reason I'm doing it on the car is to make sure that I'm placing the clamps in a spot that's not going to interfere with the suspension componentry when I try and put it all back together. And I'm really not going to put a lot of pressure on this because I need it to compress so that I can get these back off, because with these in place I probably won't be able to get a spanner onto them. which means I have to be able to undo these with my hands. What I'm trying to do is make sure that the top of the strut, when it's at full extension and without any load on it, it's at full extension. So I need to have this plate underneath that. So this is the highest point. And basically I'm pretty confident that once I put this in the car and then put a jack under the strut, once it's back in, I can jack it up, put some pressure on this, these will loosen up and I can just get them off. But if I don't do that, it's going to be very hard to dip it under. Now, you may see other guys doing this online using the super low springs, but remember that the super low springs aren't going to be as tall as these, so it's not going to be as difficult to get them under. So yeah, if you're using these Eibach ones, just put some clamps on. It'll make your life a lot easier. You're less liable to damage this trying to get it in as well. Now I can just lift that straight under, and then we should just be able to tip this in if we keep a bit of pressure on it the whole way through. Okay, so that went in relatively easily. That would have been a lot harder if I'd tried to keep everything together. So we've got this gap in here between the strut top and the rubber boot with the bearing in it and the strut. Now at the moment, because this is not all held together under pressure, the strut's going up like that and the spring's going up in a different direction. So when I jack this up, I'm just going to straighten the strut up a bit, and you'll be able to tell by the centering of the strut up here. You'll be able to see just through the top. And then just jack it up slowly, and what you're looking to get, you're looking for the spring and the dust boot to center on the strut top first. Strut itself will end up coming through the top nut, and you've just got to aim that from the top. It's a little bit tricky, but it is possible. So straighten this up and straighten that up. Okay. Okay, so we have the dust boot and the bearing seated nicely up the top, and the strut is poking through the strut top now. So we can just give it a few more pumps. And you can see now spring compressors are loose, so I'm just gonna back them out. This one's still a bit tight, so give it a couple more pumps. We'll see that loosen up at some point. Back that one off. All right, so the spring's in seated. I'll give you a really good view up here. So you can see under here, this boot is nice. It's not caught up or kinked anywhere. Everything's centered. It's quite firm. This dust boot needs to come down over here, but I'll do that in a second when I've got two hands. And so now we're ready to put the top nut on. All right, so we're gonna thread the top nut on by hand first. We don't wanna risk cross threading it. So we're gonna use our through drive again and our Allen wrench. Now I can just do this up by hand, and I don't have to worry about anything coming loose, or, you know, if you drop the weight off the strut, you're no longer compressing that top bearing and the rubber seal, so it could come out of alignment. It's just a lot neater and safer to do it this way. All right, we've bottomed out there. Just to make sure. All right. Once it had the pressure on from the spanner, that was easy to do up. So we're good to go there. Okay, so now it's time just to put all of the brackets, brake cables, the sway bar mount, and other bits and bobs back into all their clips and plugs. So let the jack down slowly. There we go. Get that out of the way. Now that piece should just slip through the hole, in. Then we can just pop the nut on. Again, that's the 17, so just do that up with the impact gun. Great. Correct torque setting. Now the brake line here, just a case of sliding it back on. And as I said, these are barbed, so they will want to push through easily. These are meant to assemble easily, not disassemble easily. So it's locked in now. Just make sure it's not going to come loose. Then we have our 2 lines here for the electronic suspension. 1 in, 2 in. Don't forget to pop them back into their links as well, so the cabling's secured. There's 2 of those, 1 here, and 1 on the back of the strut. So we're good there. And then we've got the brake sensor here, and also 1 on the back wall. Ugh. We're looking good. So I actually have a car cruise in a couple of days for Australia Day. So got to clean up the brakes. I'm going to go to a car show with lowered suspension and spacers on. I got to make sure that the brakes are looking good behind those wheels. All right, and then our spacer. Now this is designed to fit these hubs exactly. So we're sliding that on. And then the hard bit will be to get the wheel on without the hub coming off. There are tools that you can get to assist with getting the wheels on a BMW because they're not studs. Basically, it's a pin that you screw into one hole. It holds everything in place while you slide the wheel on. Then you can do up the wheel bolts fairly easily. Now I don't have one of those, so I'm just going to have to be really careful about how I put this on. Okay, so you're going to lift it on, and then what I like to do is just have a bolt at the ready, so that as soon as I get it up and can hold it in place, I can just pop a bolt in and be done with it. All right. All right. Okay, so I'm just getting these started on the threads first. Then it's time for Mr. Wizzy. All right, space is in place. That all feels very solid. I'm comfortable with that. All right, so I've already done the other side, as you would imagine. We don't need to see this twice, so let's get this onto the ground. Okay, so with the car back on the ground, I'm just going to pop the strut covers back in. And with these clips, all you do is put the shell in first, and then you put the pin back in, and that'll stop it coming out. Okay, we do the other one. Christmas tree in, then the stud. We're good to go. We just need to pop this one back in place, and as we do it, we pop the water line in, and then we have the electrical connector. Pop that in. Okay, and then with the plastic in place and these wires through, you put them in their final position, and you can tell by the marks that are on the cable. You want to get them back in the same spot just so they don't pinch anywhere. And that is factory. Okay, we never trust a rattle gun. All right, so that's actually dropped already about a finger. Now it does need to be driven around so everything can settle and we can get to the final height. But before I do that, I'm gonna get stuck into the rears. Now the sun is out in full force now, it's right above my head, and the pavement is starting to get hot. So I gotta get through this quickly and probably get a blanket down so I don't burn myself. Okay, if we come around and have a look underneath the car. So the first thing we need to do is to pull off this air deflector. Okay, so if we go to the other side of the swing arm, the main thing we need to be careful of, again, just like on the front, is this clip here extends up to a swing arm and another height sensor. So in order to get the spring out, we need to drop this whole swing arm down. And if we do drop the swing arm without disabling that height sensor again, we're going to break it. So once again, there is a plastic clip just near the half shaft. We're going to disconnect that, which will allow this to drop freely so that we can get it out of the way and then get the spring out. Oh, and off. All right, so we're off now, so I can get back to pulling off the remainder of the stuff, and then we'll drop this arm. Okay, so as I said before, the spring and the shock here are divorced. So that is the spring there, and we have the shock all the way up to the top mounting point here. That's your bump stop. Now, I don't know how far this whole shooting match is going to be able to drop, but I am going to take off things like the electric suspension connections here and pull these cables out, just because it's really easy to do. And the last thing you want is for something like this to catch and you end up damaging a sensor and not realizing it, and then throwing error codes and stuff like that. Okay, so now from the underside, we can see the bottom nut for the shock here. And really that's about the only thing that's holding this whole shooting match at the height that it is now. Now all I want to do is basically undo that nut and drop this down and see if we can get it down far enough without taking off anything else. There is a sway bar link here and stuff like that, but I'm going to see if we can get it to drop enough without taking anything else off, because it'd be nice if this is just a 1-bolt job. If not, we'll have to start pulling more stuff apart, but for now, once we take that out, hopefully this whole thing will drop down and we'll be able to take the spring out from the top here. Okay, that's enough. Like I said, just looking to have some tension there. Okay, a 19 will do the job here, and because this is a nut and bolt just slipped through, it will rotate on the back. So you need to just lock it off on the back. Now, I've just put a bit of pressure on that, which means there's pressure on this bolt. So I'm just going to back the jack off a little bit. All right, then we can get that out. Okay, so we've got the strut moving freely now, but the swing arm hasn't dropped, which means obviously this is not going to move down any further. We must be like the jack is not holding that up. That's just the assembly's height. So what we need to do is take the bolt out of here, attaching it to the bottom of the hub, or hub assembly rather, and then that will come down. But that spring could still be under compression, so I'm not going to take this out until I've moved the jack, and we're going to hold it under this just to make sure that we're safe. And then we'll take this one out and let this down slowly. All right, then we can let this down and hopefully that spring will come free. Okay, so with that free, just with one hand we can push down that swing arm. On the other hand, we can remove the top cover, and then the spring should come out. And there we go, voila, one standard A90 spring. Okay, with the spring out, if you reach down into the bottom here, you'll probably be able to pull out, it usually doesn't come out with a spring, but there is the bottom rubber insulator. So if we take that out of the car, okay, so you've got your top insulator there, you can tell by the spike in the top, and this is the bottom one that sits in the lower swing arm. What we're gonna do is just put these on the spring first, so text upright as usual. And then we will slide this one on, and I found the best way to do this is just to slip it in on the side until it pops, and then you can rotate it around until you get it seated properly, like that. We're good to go there, and then the base has to sit with that end with this divot in the end of the rubber, so slide it around. So that's ready to go back in the car. It is. If you have a look on the bottom, you'll see this pointed tab here. Now there is actually a hole in the bottom swing arm that needs to locate in. So you're going to drop it in like that, make sure that that is seated, and then we'll push the swing arm down, push the top of the spring in, and then release it so it fits up into the body where it's supposed to be. So let's get this in and located first, and then we're going to jack up the swing arm, and then we're going to bolt in. All right, so you can feel that rubber in the bottom is located. So now we're just going to push the swing arm down further, tilt the spring in, let the swing arm go, and we're located. Okay, get this side in. And this side's going to have to come up more. Okay, tight. These are both 19, so spanner on the back, Uzi on the front. Before I get out from under the car, I'll just put the wind deflector, aero package piece, whatever it is, back on. It's got an arrow telling you which way to put it. Okay, so now I'm going to untangle whatever cables we've tangled, but then plug back in our electronic suspension. Clip the lines in. It's a bit hard with that one hand. Clip the lines in. Oh. Okay, so the caliper's clean. We've got our 18mm spacer this time. Fitting nice. Now we're bringing in our wheel. Okay, we're done. Just in time too, because I'm about to melt. So let's get this back on the ground. Okay, so we've already dropped a lot. You can see we're really just at 2 fingers, probably dropped about 15mm. I'd say we're gonna get another sort of 5 as it settles. We'll get to our 20mm. Now I'm not going to show you the whole car just yet because it needs a bit of a clean, especially giant bird shit, but it does already look lower. And as I said, once I get to do a few Ks on it, I'm sure it'll sink a little bit further. So I'm going to go and give it a drive now and a wash, and then we'll see what it looks like. Okay guys, so that is the end of the long day. The car is cleaned. Check this out. It looks awesome. Like I said, can't be more happy with that gap and the flushness with the outside of the arches. I think it looks awesome. It's not too over the top. It's pretty much exactly what I was looking for. So now that that's done, there's a couple more things that we need to talk about. So let's take this back to the garage and go from there. Okay, so we're back in the garage. Now, there's a couple of extra things that I need to do to get that car sorted. The first and foremost is to get an alignment. So we're pretty careful when we pulled those suspension components apart. The majority of things haven't had an opportunity to move. We didn't pull the struts out. We didn't pull tie rod ends out and change the lengths of them or anything. Everything should be fairly fixed in position, but BMWs are not known for having good alignments out of the factory, and I am sure that Toyota is probably in the same position. So I'm gonna get out to a shop, get it fully aligned and make sure everything is Mickey Mouse. Other than that, that suspension should drop just a little bit more as the springs sag over the coming months, but that doesn't require any effort on my part other than driving the thing. So I'm gonna call it job done, which leads us into next week. So if you're coming in new to the channel, you should check out our full Violet Crumble series here, which is our RA23 Celica, and there's more A90 episodes down here. Other than that, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the Build Room. Bye for now.